Elisabeth, nicknamed Sisi, was born into the royal Bavarian house of Wittelsbach in 1837, but she enjoyed an informal upbringing. In 1853, Sisi's aunt, Archduchess Sophie, the domineering mother of 23-year-old Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph, arranged a marriage between her son and her sister Ludovica's eldest daughter, Helene. Then 15-year-old Sisi, accompanied her mother and sister Helene, traveled from Munich to the resort of Bad Ischl, Upper Austria. Helene was ready to receive the emperor's formal proposal of marriage. But Emperor Franz Joseph did not propose to Helene, but instead, he was instantly infatuated with her younger sister. He defied his mother and informed her that if he could not have Elisabeth, he would not marry at all. 5 days later, their betrothal was officially announced. The couple were married 8 months later, in Vienna on the 24th of April 1854. Sisi gave birth to her first child, a daughter, Sophie, in 1855, just 10 months after her wedding. Her mother-in-law, the Archduchess Sophie, who often referred to Elisabeth as the silly young mother, refused to allow Elisabeth to breastfeed or otherwise care for her own child. When a second daughter, Gisela Louise Marie, was born a year later, the Archduchess took the baby away from Elisabeth as well. In 1857, Elisabeth visited Hungary for the first time with her husband and 2 daughters, and it left a deep impression upon her. This trip proved tragic. 2-year-old Sophie was ill and finally passed away. Her death pushed Elisabeth into periods of heavy depression, which would haunt her for the rest of her life. On the 21st of August 1858, Elisabeth finally gave birth to an heir, Rudolf Franz Karl Joseph. When Elisabeth was still blocked from controlling her son's upbringing and education, she openly rebelled. She opposed her husband and mother-in-law on the subject of the military education of Rudolf. Austria invaded Sardinia on the 29th of April 1859, and France declared war on Austria on the 3rd May. Austria was defeated by the Franco-Sardinian army at the Battle of Solferino on the 24th of June, which resulted in the end of the war and the signing of the Armistice of Villafranca on the 12th of July 1859. The setbacks continued with defeat in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, which resulted in the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867. Elisabeth ensured that Hungary, with which she felt an intense emotional alliance, would gain an equal footing with Austria. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867 created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Andrassy was made the first Hungarian prime minister, and in return, he saw that Franz Joseph and Elisabeth were officially crowned King and Queen of Hungary in June. In 1868, Elisabeth gave birth to a daughter, Marie Valerie Mathilde Amélie in Buda. Determined to bring this last child up by herself, she poured all her repressed maternal feelings on her youngest daughter. In 1889, Elisabeth's only son Rudolf was found dead, together with his young lover Baroness Mary Wetzera, in a murder-suicide at his hunting lodge at Meierling. It was a blow from which the Empress never recovered. She withdrew from court duties and traveled widely, unaccompanied by her family. While traveling in Geneva in 1898, Elisabeth was stabbed in the heart to death by an Italian anarchist. The entire empire was in deep mourning. 82 sovereigns and high-ranking nobles followed her funeral cortege to the imperial crypt at the Capuchin Church. 16 years later, on the 28th of June 1914, the emperor's nephew and heir, Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated in Sarajevo, which resulted in Austria-Hungary's declaration of war, and that activated a system of alliances declaring war on each other, which resulted in World War I. In 1916, Emperor Franz Joseph died when the empire was on the brink of collapse. Then in 1918, Austria-Hungary Empire was dissolved, and the last emperor, Karl, withdrew from Austrian politics.